Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for tonight's event. My name is Rachel and I'm a marketing coordinator here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. In the coming weeks, we're looking forward to welcoming Heather Lunday, Shayla Lawson, Emma DeBeery, and Miriam Feldman. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you haven't already done so, you can sign up for a weekly events email at powells.com. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Diane Zinna and Natalie Jenner. Diane is originally from Long Island, New York. She formerly worked at the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, which hosts the largest literary conference in North America each year. In 2014, Diane created the Writer-to-Writer Mentorship Program, helping to match more than 600 writers over 12 seasons. Diane lives in Fairfax, Virginia with her husband and daughter. The All Night Sun is a gorgeously written, deeply felt debut about the transformative relationships that come to us when things feel darkest. And tonight in conversation is Natalie Jenner, who is the international best-selling author of the Jane Austen Society, a fictional telling of the start of society in the 1940s in the village of Chawton, England, where Austen once lived. There you go. Natalie was born in England and emigrated to Canada as a young child. Most recently, Natalie founded the independent bookstore Archetype Books in Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her family and 2 rescue dogs. The Jane Austen Society is her first published novel. This evening's event will also include a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question. If someone has typed a question that you'd also like to know the answer to, please consider upvoting that particular question. Most importantly, please consider supporting Diane and Natalie and Powell's by purchasing a copy of their books. A link to buy The All Night Sun was included in your registration email and will also be shared in the chat a few times this evening, as well as the link for the Jane Austen Society. And without any further ado, please welcome Diane and Natalie.
Hi, everybody. I am so excited to be here tonight because I get to interview and speak with Diane about probably one of my most favorite books in the past 5 years. And as Rachel was saying, I used to own an independent bookstore, so I know a little bit about a hot item when it comes to the door. And when I read this book a year ago, I read it in one night. I canceled my plans. I think I sent the blurb straight through to your editor, and I just went like, this book is so special and I want to do anything I can to get the word out about it. So Diane, this book has been racking up starred reviews left, right, and center. I love the phrase from Publishers Weekly about its inspired emotional depth. I think what I'm hoping tonight that we'll be able to discuss and kind of get across to everyone is the richness of the emotional landscape of the main character and how different experiences in her life have impacted how she's processing the now and how she's trying to move forward and sometimes failing. It's the most imaginative, beautiful, poetic arc. And I'm so proud of you. The book released last Tuesday, and I've seen you out at Barnes & Noble, I think, and an independent bookstore. Got to see your book on the shelf, and I guess, first I wanted to know how you're doing so quickly into pub, and also a little bit about the book and what it's all about. So how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Well, pub is not my thing. So, it's been a little bit hard on my soul, really. But I am so grateful to be doing this tonight with Powell's. And I see people from our debuts group on there. I think that you would agree, my debut sister, that our experience releasing our debuts into the pandemic of 2020 would have been so much different if it wasn't for that debuts group. And I just want to shout out to them for a second. And so does the storm, apparently. That every year, there's going to be a closed group on Facebook. I didn't know about this. But I was able to find my way there this year. And every year there's a group on Facebook where people who are publishing in that year get together and talk about, what their plans are going to be like, what their books are all about, helping each other think through events. And this year we have just been there for each other in a way that none of us could have anticipated, right? and we've been able to see other people's journeys unfold. And so when, you know, our books came out, we sort of knew it was going to be different than what we've seen in the past. You know, it was going to be a different kind of experience.
We were much better prepared, being in an industry that has a lot of gatekeepers and doesn't always have the resources to, you know, like share a lot of information about itself, but also traditionally hasn't. And, you know, you're on this roller coaster ride kind of, right? And
Yes.
then being able to have other people there kind of saying, it's okay, it's going to land safely. Like you're, you know, it just, I don't know. I know that for me and for you both. And then to see them here tonight is the icing on the cake. So your beautiful book, first of all, can we all just take a look at this amazing cover? It's just like the dollops of paint and the beautiful colors, and it's so stunning. I love it so much. And I was just thinking first, if you could tell the audience, you know, just a little bit about what The All Night Sun is about.
Sure. So The All Night Sun is the story of a woman named Lauren, who is a young adjunct English professor at a small, very conservative Catholic college right outside of Washington, D.C. And when we meet her, she has long been grieving the deaths of her parents alone for about 10 years.
So you've frozen a bit on us, Diane. Can you hear us at all? So I'm going to ask somebody in the chat room to let us know if I'm frozen or she's frozen.
It looks like it's just Diane that's
It's just
frozen.
Diane. Okay. So I'll talk about the book because I read the book a year ago and I read it again this afternoon. So Lauren Cress is an adjunct professor at a small liberal arts college, and she lost her parents when she was quite young, at age 18, in an accident, a tragic accident. I think I'm losing everybody now. I'm just going to keep talking. And she has never fully moved on from the horrible grief, understandably. She's using, thanks Anne, she's using lots of ways to distract herself. She's using her class. She's a very good teacher. And one day a student walks in. Her name is Siri. She's an international student from Sweden. And she also has lost both her parents, but she is at a different stage in coming out of her grief. She is going to pull Lauren forward, and they become very close, to the point where Siri asked Lauren if she would like to join her in Sweden for the summer on vacation. Now, the problem with this is it's frowned upon that a teacher and a student, albeit there's only a 10-year age difference, that they would go and do something like a vacation together. And this is probably the first of many decisions Lauren makes in the book, where it's like psychological. It's a mix of genres, because there's like the psychological tension where you're like, oh God, don't go in that room. Don't make that decision. Don't get in that van. Like you're watching kind of like a bit of a slow moving train wreck. And Diane does this incredible job in about 300 pages with very efficient but lyrical prose. She captures Sweden. She captures Midsommar and that, you know, the all night sun celebrations and being in Sweden, folklore, beautiful description of imagery, weather, and she really puts you there. It's very evocative. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't even really know. She's first person narrative voice. You don't even really know if what she's saying is really happening or did really happen. You think so, but it's that issue of, am I getting everything when I need to get it from the narrator, or is she holding back from me? So it's a really fascinating and well-written book. So as I was saying at the beginning, oh, I hear somebody coming back. I think I hear someone coming back on. But as I was saying at the beginning, when I read this book a year ago, I just knew right away that this book is very special. And I just urge everybody to read it because it will transport you, which is something I think we all need right now. We all need to, I think, get away from, for me, we've been home for 4 months on lockdown. So getting away from the four walls, but also experiencing another country, another culture, and experiencing a very important lesson in life. And it's something that we're all in a way we're struggling with. And, you know, I have a husband who's high risk. And one of the ways Diane and I have bonded is over having husbands with sort of like this kind of serious high risk health, you know, issues where we have to be particularly careful right now. And someone's like, maybe do a reading. I'm like, okay, I can do a reading. But before I do a reading, I would say that one of the things we're all coping with right now is what's called anticipatory grief. And that is the loss of the future, even the near short-term future that you thought you were going to have. It's that sense of uncertainty from day to day. And it's very wearing on people, and it really drains your energy. And what this book is exploring is somebody who has grief's like a dialogue with yourself. And I learned this when my husband was diagnosed with incurable disease, that it says, Diane's saying we've lost power in Fairfax. So I'm going to leave it to Rachel and Brita to kind of like just jump in and like let me know, you know, when enough of Natalie is enough. But just to talk quickly about grief. Grief is a very important element of Diane's book. Both the girls, women at the center of it, are effectively orphans. And what Diane and I have, here she is. I think Diane might be in her car. That would be unsafe though. No, I see beams. Okay. Hi, we're gonna wait for you because it says you're connecting. Hi, can you hear us now? So, I'm gonna go back
Natalie, do you want to go ahead and maybe read an excerpt of the book while we wait for Diane to log back in? Hopefully, she's able to.
What's great about Diane's book is that it's not sequential. And when she starts off the book, she actually starts off right on page 1, kind of giving you a little bit of an overview and a time lapse. And then you move back into the present. And so I'm going to just start reading literally chapter 1. And this is her overview part. I taught English composition in the international program at Stella Maris, a small Catholic college outside of Washington, D.C. I was a popular teacher. When class started, my show started. I led with a gentle authority I never quite exacted in real life. The students all wanted to be my favorite. No one was ever disrespectful or unprepared. The other professors complained about their problem students, about how out of control some of them were. But I never had behavior issues in my classroom. I loved my students. They participated, and I graded hard, so they worked hard. They didn't skip my class. Their writing improved. It was the first job I ever loved. In front of the class, I was always in the moment, fully theirs and full of movement, completely in my body, hands chalky, sitting atop my desk, laughing at their jokes. Students didn't depart when I dismissed them. They stayed after to tell me about their childhood bedrooms turned into walk-in closets, the jobs waiting for them in their family businesses. They would bring me candy from their whole countries. They'd want me to try everything right then. They would tell me how empty an accomplishment could feel when those you love aren't there to see it, to say, well done. I knew what they meant by that. A check mark in the margin of their paper, a nod, a smile. Many of them would write about being new to the country and all the ways they were struggling to fit in. They didn't realize how much I connected with them, how keenly I felt their description of not having the right words, of not being in on the jokes, of laughing along. You can pick up now.
Hi.
I'm finishing this paragraph, of laughing along to something you didn't understand when laughter was the last thing your homesick heart could bear. Grief can feel like homesickness.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, thank goodness. Thank you everyone for staying on, if you stayed on. I am in the park, we totally lost power. I promised you drama, here it is.
Yeah. So I've told them quite a bit about your book, and I've done a reading of the first 3-4 chapters. Where were you gonna read from? Did I take your reading? Where were you gonna read, Diane?
I was gonna read from the prologue. I have no except for this little tiny web light, but I can try to do it. It feels like I'm talking to you with candlelight going.
I think you should do a little reading as part of the experience, if you can. Yeah.
All right. So did you read from chapter 1?
Chapter 1. Yeah, where she's in the classroom.
I'm going to read a little bit from the prologue. And thank you so much for bearing with me. This is craziness. Thank you. Okay, so Natalie may have told you what this book is about. The book is about a woman named Lauren, who is a young adjunct. She's been grieving the deaths of her parents for more than 10 years by herself. And into her classroom, into her life walks this exuberant international student named Siri. And they have they form a really fast friendship. They are able to bond over grief in a way that Lauren has not experienced with anyone else in all those years. And so when the girl invites her back to Sweden for the summer, she impulsively agrees. And when she goes because the invitation sounds like a respite from grief for her. She hears her describe it as everything being green and fresh and new and just thawing out. And that idea of thawing out feels like something that she really needs. So we start with the invitation. When I accepted Siri's invitation to travel home with her for the summer, it felt like I was taking her up on a beautiful dare. I can still see her with her backpack, 18 years old, lightly crossing transoms of age and language to make me feel comfortable with her teenage friends. In dreams, Siri leads the way through Gamla Stan's crowded caramel streets, turning to smile at me as I follow behind. Back in the United States, before I impulsively accepted her invitation, I had been Siri's teacher. Like the midnight sun that does not set, my decision to go to Sweden with her spread its undying light over everything. My grief was like that too. I fell asleep to it. I awakened to it. In essays, Siri had written about this place imbued with magic, trolls, water spirits, the holiday called Midsummer, when everyone flees the cities for the countryside, when everyone turns young again. Midsummer, when the sun didn't set and night's torments didn't come. Really? She'd agreed yes, it was that green, that fresh, that new. Everything would be just thawing out. She wrote about her home back in Sweden. She was an art student. I asked her questions to color in the descriptions of the people she knew, of her country home in Olafstorp, of the traditions she kept with her family. She had a sister with long hair who worked at an airport cleaning planes. She had a brother. She shrugged through a description of her town. It's not like here, she said. She missed home, but she didn't know why. I said, put down your pen, just tell me about it. What colors do you see when you think of home? And then we were there. Lush canvases of wet meadow opened one on the other. Bright green oceans that undulated and tipped with the wind like liquid. Did we create that place with our words? I could barely remember the words she used to ask me to come home with her for the summer break. It didn't seem possible. There were words enough to make me risk the job I loved. Teaching gave my life some aspect of normalcy, and I thought then that it was normalcy that I craved. But there was no hesitation. I bought my ticket that very day. Maybe all those years alone were building to that moment, that invitation to somewhere else. I grasp at early memories of our trip now, and they are otherworldly, other-sensory. The purple door of our family's country house, did it really smell of lavender? I remember our 3 days in Stockholm as sticky and sweet, maybe because we got ice creams from vendors on 3 different corners, one right after the other. I remember sitting there beside the water, trying to talk through bites, laughing because our lips were numb. We shielded our eyes and watched tourists taking banana boat rides out beyond the Viking-style curl-proud ships in the harbor. And when I think of our talks there, they can sometimes feel like sun in my eyes. We visited so many beautiful towns there. I could never pronounce their names right. I couldn't grab hold of the sounds to remember them. With so little English around me, I had the feeling of being half awake the whole time. In some ways, it was like being a child, when you could just close your eyes during a conversation, slide down under the table, and run around. But I was not a child. I was almost 30 then. For weeks, we zoomed through storybook towns with square cobbled streets and curved one-lane roads, barely able to accommodate Siri's tiny car. In the countryside, there were dark red farmhouses with white frames around the windows. We jumped from barn lofts, laughing so hard that strands of hay got caught in our teeth. We laughed as though we were both children. And on the last day of the trip, she arranged for a group of us to travel to Öland, an island off of Sweden's eastern coast, where we would camp and celebrate the cup. She said that at Midsummer, it would even be warm enough to swim, but I could see my breath when her brother Magnus helped us load the car that morning, and I could see his breath when he stooped to check the air pressure and the tires, and when, after all the other had gone inside, he stood to face me for the first time and met her a goodbye. Goodbye, I repeated softly, unable to match his emotionless tone. As he walked back into the house, I stepped into the place where I'd seen his breath in the air and willed myself to feel the warmth he'd shown me a week earlier before he'd grown cold. I wasn't just going away for 2 days. These were the last. Didn't he feel time running out like I did? I suppose all those sunlit nights and long twilights had made it feel like time to work everything through. All of Sweden was intoxicated with the endless June sun. The animals, too, seemed dopey and confused. That day in Kalmar, right before we started to cross the Great Öland Bridge to the island, a moose walked slowly across the road, blocking traffic for a while and blinking peacefully at the honking cars. And then we were crossing the bridge, 4 high miles. Siri squinted hard at the white lines through the clouds that kept touching down. Her friend slumbered in the back seat, a mash of black clothes, smeary eyeliner, and punk rock hair. They were tentative to use the English they learned in school, even though they spoke it fine. Sometimes when they were drinking, they tried more. I sat in the passenger seat, a crate of insurance on the floor between my feet. I had been looking forward to that, just us, but at the last minute, Siri had invited these other girls. The day is going to warm up, Siri whispered, trying not to wake her friends. I was grateful that she was whispering. I thought it meant she was ready to talk to me about all that had happened with her brother. Through the fog, I just glimpsed water beyond the bridge. There were promises of weight, but they gathered no energy. Helmer sunned, Siri. It feels like I'm flying, I said. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a castle on that shore called Kalmar Slot. It's from medieval times. People sometimes get married there. It's very beautiful at night. They light it up. I tried to see, but when there were breaks in the fog, all I could make out was the glitter of the sound. I turned to look behind us, but there was a yellow inner tube pressed against the window of the hatchback. You're still going to swim with me, right? She asked. I shook my head, but I expected I'd cave to her and be swimming soon. Over those weeks, I'd let Siri dye my hair blonde, then blacken the ends. We'd gone shopping for new clothes. I'd cut up the t-shirts I'd brought to make them look punk rock, crimped my hair with an actual iron, and skinny dipped for the first time in my life. Afterward, in a woodsy bar, with my hair still wet and with damp clothes, I shouted "Scoop!" and danced with my eyes closed, not to keep the room from spinning, but because I couldn't bear to see all of that reflected back at me in the mirror above the bar. Siri said she liked it, but I was trying, that I was shaking off the shell of grief I'd worn long. There's an old legend. It says you mustn't go swimming on Midsummer because an evil spirit named Naken waits out there in the water, sitting on a rock playing a fiddle. He's waiting to pull you down. In the story, a maiden stabbed herself in the heart rather than go with him, and white water lilies turned red with her blood. If he gets you, he'll make you live under the water with him forever. Siri smiled mischievously. You see, we have to swim. And I'm going to just skip ahead 2 pages to the bottom of page 8, where we go swimming. Siri announced that they were going swimming first thing. We drove through a tunnel-like stretch of woods, the branches of trees knitting together over the road. It was like waking up when we saw the sky again. We parked alongside a rugged beach. The terrain reminded me of a beach on the north shore of Long Island I had often walked as a child with my mother and father, only the slope that the girls ran down was shining blue and green in the sun. Fringy ropes of what looked like blue algae swung lazily in the gentle waves, and the rocks were fuzzy with it underfoot. The beach was called Neptuni Akrar, Neptune's Fields. You said you would swim, Siri yelled, rushing down ahead of me. Clutching the yellow inner tube, I picked my way down the rocks. Bright blue flowers grew all along the shoreline. We were the only people as far as I could see, and the coastline stretched long and curved, changing from otherworldly blue beach to stark white in the distance. 3 maroon sea huts stood at the top of the ridge, and a thin string of cloudline ran parallel to the shore. I sat down upon the inner tube while the girls splashed in the sea. They had an easy, loving way among themselves. They were close in the way that only childhood friends could be. "Come in with us, Lauren," Siri yelled. I waved to her, but I didn't get up to join them. Suddenly, they were running toward me with big splashing strides, hanging on to one another, their hair wet and pressing against their cheeks. They each grabbed hold of the inner tube and pulled me into the ocean. I went under smiling and got a mouthful of water. We couldn't stay in for long. The water was cold. When we came out, our skin was tinged blue from the algae. We wrung out our clothes to dry and sunned ourselves on the azure, blooming rocks. I loved that afternoon. There was no English, no Swedish, just sun on our bodies and sleep. When afternoon came and our clothes were dry, we drove to the campsite. The girls in the back seat kept looking at themselves in a little mirror, their teeth shining stark white in contrast to their bluish skin. I rested my head against the passenger side window, and my breath made a fog on the glass. I found myself thinking of Magnus's goodbye that morning, and in the condensation, I lazily traced the letter M. Sunlight streamed through the trees overhead, turning to clips of light when I closed my eyes. I rubbed the wetness from my fingers against my thigh. "Lauren," Siri said, soft and low. I opened my eyes and wiped away the M on the glass. "Can you help me?" She unfolded a map of the island against the steering wheel as she drove. I smiled, whispering English, things that made it just us again.
Diane, I have to ask, what was the initial spark or inspiration for what is obviously like an elegy on friendship and, you know, that new time in life with somebody, that exciting time when you're kind of falling in love with them, you know? What was the inspiration for you with this book?
I think it's in two parts. First, the book really came to me as a dream. I woke up one morning and I had this feeling for a book, and so I rushed to my computer and I quickly sketched out 20 chapters. I had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the dream was simply two women on a train going through Europe, and the train stops in Paris, and one woman goes down to an underground bathroom full of art, and in walks an old lover. And she has to make a decision about whether or not to get back on the train with her friend and continue that journey or stay with the lover. And as I started to write that, the idea of Paris quickly dissolved into Sweden and Stockholm, which is a city I knew really well. I was starting to write about grief. I don't think going into the city that I knew really well allowed me to explore grief in a safe way. Yeah. The story itself, I mean, those two women, as soon as I started to write, I knew that the inspiration for the other friend was a friend of mine who I had traveled to Sweden with. And I knew too that this wasn't a story about choosing between a friend and a lover, but really about choosing between two sides of herself.
When you had mentioned about switching it from Paris to Sweden and how that liberated you a little bit. When I was reading this book, I didn't think it could be set anywhere else. So I find that fascinating. When you changed the setting, how much of the book changed in terms of that original outline?
It happened really quickly, yes. And so, I mean, almost as soon as I mentioned a train station, I was thinking of the train stations in Stockholm. And for those of you who have been there, you know it's called the world's longest art gallery. Yeah. Because is just infused with color and art, and you're in this womb, this space of art when you get off the train. And I just knew that I couldn't set it anywhere else. You know, those memories of being on the train and getting off in each station and exploring what was there, it just led me to, this was going to be a story about Sweden, and all those other memories kept rushing back.
Did it also lead you to, this is going to be a book about art? Because, I mean, Siri and her brother are both artists, and this book is partly about how we can connect to each other through art or over art. Is that partly because of the setting in Sweden with the subway station?
I think so. And early on, and you may have read it when I was off, trying to figure out my light here. But you know, I knew I wanted to make her an art student. I wanted someone who was creative. And as soon as I wrote the scene where she describes to Lauren that whenever she makes a mistake, whenever there's a tear in a piece of art, that she fills it in with fine glitter gold.
Yeah.
That it's now made something, it's become something more precious because it has been damaged and fixed, right? Then I knew that I wanted to explore art more deeply in the book.
What you just said as well, I guess, is a metaphor for living with grief, with those cracks and having to fill them in again. And you had mentioned, grief at the beginning as well. What do you, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. What do you want the reader most to take away from your book in terms of themes? Is it grief and friendship and the beauty of a broken soul? Like, what is it for you that you kind of were most moved, as you wrote, that you were most attracted to thematically and most wanted to convey?
I knew that I was writing a character that a lot of people would call unlikable, right? I've heard that. I heard it from editors who were considering the book when I was trying to sell it. But I knew that I really wanted to write a kind of character who had been so broken down by her experiences. And I wanted to do a close examination of that because I knew there were people who could identify with a person like that. I can identify with a person like that. I read that story and I feel like she is speaking, whenever she speaks of grief, she's speaking in my voice.
Yes.
I knew there were people who would hear it and they would have a sense of empathy that maybe they hadn't been presented on the page.
It's interesting you say that because, as you know, I was going through a form of grief as well. And when I was reading your book, I remember you mentioned that she watches Home and Garden TV on a loop. And I was like, oh, I do that. And then I just, right away, I got this girl, like right at woman, I understood her. And I also think one of the things I love about your book is how deeply you go into that grief-stricken mind. And you had mentioned the setting kind of liberating you to really explore on that deep level. And I think that's what makes your book so beautiful. Would you say that writing the book, the process of it, helped you through your own moments of grief or memories of loss in your life?
Well, just really quickly, I wanted to mention something about your book. If you all don't know about the Jane Austen Society, I really recommend it. I just love this book so much. And as I was rereading your book again, I found there was a similar theme happening with some of your characters. Right?
Yeah.
One character who has lost her husband and then loses a member. And she talks about how she has the kind of grief that keeps people away. Right? Yeah. Where, it's almost too hard for them to hold.
To be around.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And so, I knew that's what I was going to be writing about. And that was the kind of grief that I experienced.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say feeling for me to write it. It was really hard to write it. But I was working on this book for 13 years. And you can't really be present with that kind of grief intentionally and so closely for 13 years and not be changed by it. But I would say that the most healing thing for me so far has been in the reception. Yeah. There weren't people around me then that were giving me the kind of solace that I needed, but now people are able to recognize their own stories and they're reaching out to me, and it's in the reception that it feels like I found community and I found healing.
I couldn't agree more. And I just think the greatest gift as authors or as writers is to put something down that resonates with people, and then they reach out to you and they thank you, like, this got me through this, or this really helped me understand X. And it's the great joy, and it's how the book lives on. And you mentioned it, that you worked on this on and off, I think for 13 years. I also know that you wrote it in your car sometimes. Like, you wrote it whenever you could. Do you have a sense of how many drafts ultimately that you in terms of, major drafts that you went through?
I am so glad you brought this up because there's something I didn't tell you. So when my book was released last Tuesday, Natalie was so kind and sent me this giant vase of flowers, these beautiful roses. And at my first launch event, I had them positioned behind me and they matched the book cover so beautifully. You know what happened? Like, literally 1 minute before I went live for my launch event, my big butt knocked over the vase of flowers and crashed to the ground. And water went all over the rug in front of me, but also on the rug in front of me was my stack
of drafts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as getting ready for the Zoom, I could see birds melting.
Oh my God.
So there were a lot of drafts. I can tell you that right now. But there was a lot of revision that happened, and now I can just put them in the garbage.
Yeah, I did that recently. I got the big liquor box and just like dumped them, like dropping bombs down. It's just like, you're gone, you're done. But when you were writing, did you have a sense? I know you had said the dream and that you outlined the dream when you woke up, but because things changed with the change in setting, did you have a sense of what you were writing towards? I'm a pantser, as I'm very always bragging about. It's like, I have no idea what's going on. It's like, yeah, we can kind of tell. But with you, could you tell when you were writing that where you were heading to, or was it very much feeling your way through?
I was feeling my way through, and those 20 chapters that I sketched out, very little of that remains in the story today.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, the real gift of that dream was it gave me a sense that I could write a book across 20 chapters. You know, I could write a book with a middle that wasn't flappy. I could see my way through it. And, you know, as I was writing it, you know, I've never been a plotter. I wasn't then. Yeah. Every scene was informing the next one. And so I just like,
I didn't know we were the same that way. I'm so excited. I didn't know that. I think partly because your book is not sequential, which I love. It makes so much sense to me that I thought, well, there was a lot of revision involved, but I didn't know how that first draft went. Did you find that you were building up draft to draft, or were you cutting a lot? Like, I tend to be very on the lean side, and I tend to be just fleshing out. What does your process look like after that first one or two drafts?
There was one way that I was revising a lot, and some of you who are friends with me and have, you know, kind of been with me through this journey for a while, you might have remembered a post I made on Facebook where I was in my office, which I very rarely write in. I do write in my car, but I had spread out across like an ottoman and a desk, like all these little sticky notes, you know, just the other, and probably 300 of them. And they were color coded to show when we were in Sweden and when we were in Washington, D.C. That was really important to me, that I was getting that narrative back and forth right. Yeah. That structure between her time in Sweden and that memory of what happened at Midsummer and her time in Washington, D.C., I wanted the swiftness with which those memories start to toggle back and forth. As it was getting faster and faster, I wanted that to show her mental breakdown. Yeah. You know, I wanted people to feel it, you know, and to really feel like the rub of those memories and her life just sparking and catching flame. So when I was working with those little sticky notes, that's where a lot of my revision was. Like, how am I moving back and forth in time to show?
That's brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant that the process of editing was thematically reflective of her mental state in a way. I just absolutely love that. My characters just show up. Do your characters just show up? And when they do, are they fully formed? Do you kind of already know them? Like, how do you create your characters? Because the one thing I will say about these characters are, they are unnerving. They are fascinating. They are, I wouldn't say, they're not unlikable. They're just, they feel very real, but extremely complex. And at the same time, very organic. They feel like this is exactly what her brother would be like. This is exactly what her sister would be like. How did they show up for you in the plot?
They do not show up fully formed. I might have a glimmer in my mind about who they are. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that I develop the characters is really in the amount of writing that I'm doing. Now, you asked before, was this much longer? This was a much longer book that had to be cut down before it went out to market. Yeah. Digressions, there had other plot lines that just didn't make it into the final version. Yeah. Whenever I found myself with a character in a scene, so much of my book is not plot driven. It really is and about internal, complexity. And so I would spend a lot of time writing maybe 3 or 4 pages of this person in this scene. What are they thinking? And from those pages, handwriting, I would pull maybe 1 or 2 sentences. And so characters became the best of all that work, and there was a whole, there's a ton more backstory for each one of them in these now drenched drafts and handwritten notes, that didn't make it to the page, but I felt it, and I hope that the reader can feel it there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love hearing that. I did not know that about how you create your characters, but it makes so much sense because as I'm reading your book, when I was rereading it as well, there were these lines that were so encapsulating of that person's character, and they would be in the middle of a section, and I would read the line, and I would just be like, that is the clue to that person. But it was strung throughout the book in this really interesting way. I mean, it was just so well done. One of the themes that I found most fascinating about your book was the female friendship and the jealousies and the, I don't say territorialness, but, there was different aspects of the complexity of what, Lauren is going through in terms of what she wants from her friend and what she needs and expects Siri to be for her. And I was wondering if the story in the book was reflective at all about friendships that, in real life that you've had. I know we're not supposed to ask that question, but I was curious because it felt very real to me as a woman. I recognized this type of female friendship. I've had it, I've been party to it, and I was just curious.
Oh yeah, and I would say I'm definitely the kind of person who, I've had situations where I've been let down by friends, and then I keep inviting that kind of personality back into my life as though I need to work through it. And so maybe I was working a little bit on the page as well. Yeah. But I look at the character of Siri, who started out as sort of this feeling of a beloved friend of mine, a true beloved friend, one that I had traveled to Sweden with. In early drafts, and my agent and my editor know this, she was an angel all the way through. She made no mistakes. She was always super supportive of Lauren, and the story was so boring because there was nothing for Lauren to rub up against, with this being such a friendship story. Siri had to be more complex in order for Lauren to change and for Lauren to exhibit the things that she needed to in order to, move through her grief. And so, now Siri is, I still think she's an angel at the start, when we see her, but then Sweden, she's different, and Lauren discovers it, and the reader discovers it, and I discover it, and I'm like, wow, I really wrote, this memory of a friend very differently than she is, because she truly is an angel in real life.
I was wondering too if your characters ever misbehaved or surprised you in a way that you were like, oh, I did not see that coming. I don't know that I want to go there, but maybe I will. Like grit your teeth and write. Did that ever happen?
I don't know if I would say that. I feel like I was asked a lot by my editor to push farther with them. And I was really grateful for that because my editor, I'll just say, if Cleo is on with us tonight.
She is. I saw her.
Anyone else right now. Cleo, hey. But she spoke to me about these characters like they were real people. Mm-hmm. So well, and our discussions were always, more about, would she have really done that? And she spoke about them like she loved them, and I knew that they were in really good hands with her.
Yeah. We're both a little older than a lot of debut authors, and you were a composition teacher, and you have had, probably techniques and recommendations for your students. When you were writing, did you find that you were either adhering to or blowing them up a little bit, like as a teacher? How was the process for you?
That is such a good question, because I actually, in my creative writing classes, especially with fiction, I would start off each course with a list of 10 things we were going to cover. And they were my 10 rules for fiction, right? And I would go over one rule in each class, but I would always show about how you can blow this up. You know, it wasn't a hard and fast rule. This is something that people talk about. Here's all the different ways, all the different permutations of how you can destroy that rule. And I was often destroying rules, you know. Number one, don't have a prologue, right? Everyone is talking about don't start with a prologue, start right in the story. But it felt really important to me to show the reader where we're going. You know, I wasn't have to tell the story from Washington, D.C., but I wanted them to feel the atmosphere on the first page.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I had a prologue too, so I would have failed your course. We're going to move into the Q&A portion now of the program. And one of the questions I have here is, what was the biggest change from the first draft to the final book? Was there like the single biggest change? Yeah.
I think the largest change was that I had another character. There was another love interest for Lauren. In this book, the love interest, of course, is Magnus, Siri's brother, which causes a whole lot of problems. But there was always another love interest at the school, and I miss him. You know, may he rest in peace. His name was Charlie, and he was fantastic because he was just such a wonderful contrast to Magnus. Yeah. He was steady, you know, he was the kind of man that you want to marry, right? And I missed, when I pulled him out, I missed a lot of the lines that were attributed to him. Spent a lot of time with him, you know, just like with everything. I missed, you know, what I was able to show about his inner life.
No, that would be hard. I mean, it is a form of grief as well in a much sort of superficial way. But Martin asks, what writing advice or something you learned about writing from your grad school days stuck with you the most, if anything?
Hey, Martin. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna say, and he's gonna laugh because. Okay, so we had a class with Harry Crews. You know, people may not know his work, but he was a very intense teacher. And I think I was the only female in the class at the time. I mean, when I was going to grad school at that time, I was pretty much the only female in the program. All the teachers were men. And this man was like, you know, taking it to a whole nother level. But he was the one, like, even though he was the one I was most uncomfortable with as a teacher, he was the one that I found myself quoting the most as I taught my own students. And one of them, the things that he would say was, he had written something that was really profane, and he had shown his elderly mother. And he was worried about how she would react to it. And what she told Harry was, you know, there are things that you don't say in other people's living rooms. And there's things that you don't do in other people's living rooms, but we don't live in other people's living rooms. And I always treasured that. You know, I felt like that gives you so much permission to go to places that may not be polite.
Absolutely. Tiffany asks, what was your reaction when the movie Midsommar came out? Were you worried that your book might seem too bandwagony? And how much did the film influence you, if at all?
Thank you, Tiffany. I actually wrote a piece for the Random House blog about this because it was a moment of sheer panic for me when I saw the trailer. At that point, you know, I'd been working on the book for 12 years. And, you know, one morning I woke up from a text from a friend saying, hey, look at this trailer, isn't this cool? And, you know, even the fact that it had the same title as as the book originally did. I mean, this was always Midsummer to me, spelled that way. You know, all my computer passwords were spelled Midsommar, and it was, you know, it's still the file name for every document I have on my computer. It's filed under Midsummer. I was really terrified that that Ari Aster was going to hijack the idea of Midsummer in people's minds, and that I would never be able to tell a story about Midsummer without people thinking of sledgehammers and cliffs, right? So I was really worried about it. I spoke to my agent and my editor about it. They said, don't worry. And it turned out to be a blessing, probably, because more people are aware at some level about what the holiday is, right?
Yeah. I'm reading one more. Dawn says, I tend to feel my way through when I'm writing, and now I have a story with lots of research that's given me a plot, and I know I need to get to point B, but I don't know how to get there. How do you keep the characters from wandering around with nothing to do until you figure out what to fill in? I mean, that's a really good plotting question, right? In terms of pacing, and when you're writing without, like you and I do, without an outline, what you're exploring as you're waiting for that to hit you. What would you say to Dawn's question?
Yeah, I think, I also did a lot of research for my book, and I didn't lead with the research. I was going to have to lead with relationship. Yeah. And when you are able to tell that story, then there are going to be moments where the research that you've done will naturally weave itself in. And it needn't be everything that you've been working on and all the information that you've gathered, but maybe just the best of it will appear at the right time.
I think this is a great answer. I love that about focusing on the relationship. I tend to have, like you, a lot of characters. And the great thing about having a lot of characters is part of the fun as a writer is watching them bash up against each other and, interact and let each other down and fall in love. Somebody wanted to know in the audience what you've been reading lately, and maybe books that you have enjoyed and recommend.
Oh my goodness. So I mentioned my beloved Debuts 2020 group, and that has been a source for so many books for me. In that group, we've got people from all different kinds of genres that I don't typically read, and so I've been able to expand my reading so much through reading their work. Yeah. One book that I can't recommend highly enough, in addition to the Jane Austen Society, a book by a Tasmanian author. Her name is Erin Hortle, and it's a book called The Octopus and I, and set on the Tasmanian coast, and it's about a breast cancer survivor who, in an attempt to rescue an octopus that's crossing a road that crosses over the ocean, gets hit by a car. She has to come to terms with her body and with herself, and it is just a miracle of a book. I was just so drawn in by the way that she described the animals and the sea life and the coastline. I can't recommend it highly enough.
I guess I was wondering if I can ask a question, what are you working on now? It's not a lot of time to creatively write right now, but do you have an idea for something else, or?
Yeah, I am. I've been working on a book for several years, and it's set in Korea. It follows families who have been separated because of the Korean War, and it's something that's really dear to me. I've done a lot of research about the stories of these families' separations, and also very politically charged family reunifications. Yeah. Very relationship based, but it's set in Korea, and it's a story about Korean people. And so really wrestling to get to the end. I feel like I've been trusted with so many people's stories, people who came to me, people who have lived through those separations and reunifications, and people who want me to tell their story. And yet I'm very conscious of the Own Voices movement right now and how important that is. And so my goal is just to finish it and to know that I've finished it. And maybe I could share them. Publishing this story, that's my goal right now.
There's one more question that I thought was really interesting about, Dawn again asks, there's water spirits in Norway. I've heard of trolls, but not water spirits. How are they different than in other countries? I don't know about this, so I'd love to hear the answer, yeah.
Sure. So there's the story of Nakken, who I mentioned in the prologue. And when I mentioned these water spirits to a Swedish friend, after I've been doing some research, there's even a similar spirit called Bakahasten, who, this is very distressing, but he's a horse that stands on the edge of maybe a pond or a lake and tempts children to climb on its back. And then when there's a whole long line of children on its back, it jumps into the ocean and drowns them all. But basically that's the water spirit legend. Nakken does the same thing. The Nix do the same thing. And when I mentioned this to my Swedish friends, they're like, oh yeah, we know about them. As though it's just something they've always grown up with, and just normal. about that.
It's kind of like the Pied Piper of Hamlet, I guess, in a little way. Final words, I guess, advice, given that we are both older as debut authors, and we both worked for more than a decade, in my case, decades. How did you find the strength to keep going with this story and with your writing in general? I didn't. I quit for 10 whole years. I'm older as well, but how did you find the strength to kind of hold on to both the story and to developing your craft?
That's a good question. You know, I feel like for people who may be starting later in life or have been sticking with it for a long time, and it's not coming to pass in the way that they thought it would, I would just keep going, because, you know, everything comes of its own time. And if I had tried to publish a book like this in my 20s, right out of grad school, right after Harry Cruz's class, when I was in that class with all men, you know, not able to really write the kind of stories that I wanted to write because I was always afraid of being viewed as too sentimental. You know, I mean, during that time, my work took on a cynicism and a sarcasm that I push away now.
Yeah.
And I had to grow through that. You know, one thing I didn't mention is that on my graduation day from my MFA program, I didn't walk there. I went to pick up my diploma, and then I went to go see my mom. She had moved down to Florida with me when I went to my graduate program. And I went to her apartment to show her. And I found her. You know, she had passed away. And I walked in and I found her there. And from that point forward, I was still writing, but everything I wrote had to do with that. And that took me, of course, decades to get through, right? And I think to some degree, what came out of it is the all-night sun, you know, but it takes its time. It's going to require you to take all the time that that book or that story needs, and you can't rush it. And there'll be more stories, you know, in their own time.
I absolutely agree. We're going to be wrapping up now, and you had indicated that you wanted to read just a tiny bit from your acknowledgments. Rachel, do we have a second for Diane to do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you all again for sticking with me tonight through all of this drama. I wanted to read this, just the first paragraph from my acknowledgments, because a writer recently contacted me after buying the book and reading this page, and she told me that it felt to her like a message in a bottle from one writer to another. And so, for example, if you have been writing for a long time and you're not seeing your work being received the way that you hoped it would be, this is for you. To all who are struggling, who don't know if their voices matter, to the writers and artists who wonder if all they do will forever be invisible, I honor you. To the tellers of stories for which there are no comp titles, the writers of unlikable female narrators, to the misfit writers, the parent writers scribbling after the babies go to sleep, the writers writing in their heads, the writers writing in their cars, the writers living in their cars, retiree writers who feel too old to start, the young writers whose families tell them it's not practical to continue, the 20-year overnight successes, the poor ones, the sick ones, the baffled, the lost, the marginalized, the slushed, the ones with no writers groups, the ones with destructive writers groups, the ones who want to clear a path for others. I see you and urge you to keep going. You are not alone. Please believe in yourself, even when you don't believe in yourself.
Amen.
That was beautiful. Well, thank you both for joining us for tonight's event. Diane, thank you so much getting through the thunderstorm and everything. Thank you, Natalie, for rolling with it. It was a pleasure to host both of you and welcome all of you. Please consider purchasing a copy of The All Night Sun by visiting us at powells.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out our lineup of other upcoming virtual events. And we look forward to seeing you at another one of our events again soon. Take care until then.
Bye, everybody.